The dust hadn't quite settled yet. At 0600 forward operating base, Falcon still wore its desert night, the sand-colored sky just beginning to shift into dawn. The UH-60 Blackhawk sat on the far end of the tarmac, its rotors still. Crew members moved like shadows around it, checking tie-downs and fuel lines, heads low against the residual gusts of grit that still whispered across concrete. She came walking straight down the flight line. No hesitation, no glance around like someone unsure of where they were going. Just steady, firm strides, worn civilian cargo pants, a gray zip-up jacket that had seen better years, and a backpack that looked like it had been dragged through at least 3 deployments. She stood out the second she came into view. Not because she looked lost, but because she didn't. She walked with the kind of purpose that didn't match the way she was dressed. Lieutenant Bradley Morrison caught sight of her as he stepped away from one of the trucks. He was freshly pressed, his boots new, sidearm holstered with textbook precision. This was his first deployment, and it showed in the sharpness of his posture and the constant edge of performance in his voice. His expression twisted the moment he spotted her. Civilian, walking toward a tactical aircraft. Not a good look. He didn't wait to call it in. He walked straight toward her, placing himself in her path. His tone was clipped, loud enough to make a few heads turn nearby. This is a restricted flight line. Civilians have no business being out here. She stopped only a few steps from him. No alarm, no retreat. She looked him in the eye like she had already taken his measure. Her eyes were the first thing that didn't match. Not wide or pleading, just cool, steady, almost clinical, blue-gray, calm as an overcast ocean. Morrison tried again, injecting more authority, asked for her credentials. She replied quietly, said she had clearance, didn't offer anything else. Her voice didn't rise, didn't explain, just the facts. Simple, unbothered. He scoffed, the kind of sound officers make when they think they've already won. Around them, a few other soldiers began to watch. One of the privates chuckled. Another pulled out a phone and held it just low enough to not get called out. Nothing serious yet. Just morning entertainment. The woman didn't fidget. She didn't try to defend herself. She just stood there, her backpack slung on one shoulder, her hands at her sides, fingers relaxed. Her boots told a different story than her clothes. Not cheap hiking boots or store-bought mock combats. Real issue leather. Scarred in places only field use could wear down. Soles flattened, toes dust-worn. Laces coated in the same fine grit that covered the airfield. Morrison didn't notice the boots. He was too busy puffing himself up for the growing audience. He asked if she was with the press, or a contractor's wife who thought she could wander onto any part of the base. Every word dripped with condescension. She didn't respond, and her silence seemed to irritate him more than if she'd pushed back. Another soldier came closer, this one older, from the maintenance crew. He watched, squinting slightly, not just at her, but at the way Morrison squared his shoulders. There was something in the way she stood, like she'd been there before, like she didn't need to prove anything. Morrison took a step closer, and his voice dropped into that too smooth tone officers use when they think they're educating someone. He explained the situation again, slower this time. His hand hovered near his sidearm, a gesture not lost on the other troops watching. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her hands or back away. She barely moved at all, just shifted her weight slightly, the strap of her backpack creaking with the motion. It was a subtle thing, but someone who'd seen a few things might have noticed it. A minute shift in posture, balanced, controlled, not tense, not aggressive, but ready. Another gust of wind kicked sand up around them, curling low around her boots and pant cuffs. Morrison kept talking, a little louder now, a little more flushed in the face. His words grew harsher, calling her delusional, maybe even unstable. A few heads turned away then, not all. Some still smiled, but others were starting to get a different read. She didn't give them much. No theatrics, No shouting, just stillness, and eyes that didn't blink much, that never once left the man in front of her. Around them, the early sun began to punch through the haze, casting long shadows over the tarmac. One of those shadows belonged to someone who knew that anyone that still could hold eye contact under threat, in the open, unarmed, and unmoved, wasn't someone you wanted to bet against, not without knowing what they'd seen, or what they'd done to survive it. Morrison's voice cut through the dry morning air like it was trying to prove something. The woman didn't move, didn't look away. Her hand had just started to reach toward her jacket pocket when Morrison lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. His grip was too tight, the kind of force people use when they're trying to show authority instead of earn it. A few heads jerked up at the sound of contact. The mood shifted just slightly, like wind changing before a storm. "You don't need to touch her," someone muttered nearby, but no one stepped in. Not yet. Morrison was red in the face now, loud and short-breathed, like he thought volume could replace judgment. He barked into his radio, calling for the military police. Said they had a possible impersonator trying to access restricted flight assets. Accused her of presenting herself under false clearance. She didn't pull her arm back, didn't raise her voice or change her stance. She just looked at him the way a surgeon might look at someone mishandling a scalpel. Cold, focused. The dust swirled again, catching in her hair and lashes, but her expression didn't shift. Around them, more personnel had stopped whatever they were doing. Some had their phones up. One guy whispered that she was probably crazy. A few laughed. It wasn't the kind of crowd that rallied to injustice. It was the kind that watched it to pass the time. A mechanic stepped away from the bird. Older guy, shaved head, forearms sun-stained, wrench still in his hand. He narrowed his eyes and tilted his head slightly, like a memory was trying to surface. Something about her posture, or the way she didn't blink. He didn't say anything, just stopped moving and started watching. She spoke. Finally. Calm and quiet. Told Morrison he might want to let go of her arm. Her tone didn't rise, but something about it made a few soldiers exchange glances. Morrison's hand tightened in response, the way people double down when they feel the ground shift under them. He called her a threat now, warned her again that she was going to be detained, said she could be carrying forged credentials, threatened further charges for resisting. She still didn't resist. That was when Master Sergeant Williams showed up, 20 years in, 3 combat tours, and a way of walking that said he'd seen it all. He didn't bark. He didn't posture. He just appeared, his eyes scanning fast across the scene. Morrison straightened like he'd just seen his principal. His voice flipped from loud to formal in a heartbeat. Explained the situation with clipped precision, tried to make it sound like he had things under control. Williams looked at the woman, then at Morrison, then back again. He asked if she had credentials. She nodded, started to move again, slow and deliberate. That's when Morrison yanked harder and said she wasn't to reach for anything. Her free hand froze in mid-motion, not from fear, from control, as if her body had been trained to pause exactly like that, not an inch more. Williams looked closer now. His eyebrows drew down, barely perceptible. The woman shifted again, barely. A change in weight, a transfer of balance. Nothing dramatic, but someone who'd done live extraction or CQB would have recognized it. Tactical awareness, controlled efficiency, movement stripped of anything unnecessary. The mechanic in the back took a half step forward. He hadn't taken his eyes off her since the grip tightened. One of the younger soldiers whispered to a buddy that Morrison might be screwing up bad. The friend snorted, still amused. Williams told Morrison to stand down and let her produce ID. Morrison ignored the instruction, doubled down again. Said she might be a threat. Said anyone could claim clearance. Called her mentally unstable. That word hung in the air for a long second. The woman tilted her head slightly, just enough to signal interest, her wrist still in his grasp, but not struggling. Her eyes didn't shift. Morrison didn't notice the tension that rippled through the watching crew. Not fear. Just a kind of breath-hold stillness that comes before someone breaks a rule you didn't even know existed. Williams stepped in finally, closing the distance, his hand out, not to grab, just to de-escalate. He asked her again to slowly reach for whatever identification she was trying to present. This time, Morrison didn't stop her, but he stayed close, like proximity made him more right. She moved, slowly. Every step, precise. Her hand went into her pocket like it was following muscle memory. She pulled out a small black leather folder. Closed. Didn't open it yet. Just held it. Williams asked her name. She didn't answer. At least, not right away. The wind picked up again, carried sand across the pavement. A drone overhead passed unnoticed. A siren sounded somewhere distant, irrelevant. Then she said something that made the older mechanic shift where he stood. Just one line. Told Morrison he was new here. Maybe second month in country. Maybe fresh out of Fort Benning. Still thinking the uniform made him dangerous. The line wasn't mean. It wasn't mocking. It was surgical. Morrison's jaw tightened. He asked how she knew his background. Said she had no right to speak to him like that. Called her a nobody. Williams didn't say anything. But he looked at her closer now. Looked at her boots. The scarring on her hands. Looked at the patch on the edge of the backpack that had mostly been covered till then. Black background. Something faint stitched on the corner. Silver thread. Still. Morrison kept talking. The louder he got, the smaller he sounded. The woman didn't raise her voice once. Her breathing never changed. She didn't flinch, didn't twitch. Her silence had weight to it. Not passive. Calculated. Williams finally asked what unit she was attached to. That's when someone in the crowd finally stopped filming. When a few of the younger ones looked at each other, unsure if they were supposed to keep laughing. The mechanic stepped closer, eyes locked now. Recognition was starting to form. Not from today. From somewhere darker. Somewhere with less sunlight and more blood. The woman didn't answer the question. She just let it hang. That silence said more than any reply ever could. Colonel James Mitchell stepped onto the tarmac at 0617. His gait was deliberate, favoring his right leg, a limp born not of weakness, but of history. He'd been briefed for wheels up in less than 15 minutes, and nothing on the flight schedule included civilian interference. The raised voices ahead pulled him toward the commotion with the inevitability of command. The gathered personnel shifted as he approached, tension folding inward like paper in a burn. Morrison straightened instantly, his hand still near his sidearm. His tone flipped from irritated to clipped, efficient. He greeted the colonel with a hasty summary. Civilian, possible security breach, non-compliant, possibly delusional. Mitchell barely nodded as he processed the words, but his eyes were already on the woman. She hadn't moved, still standing exactly where she had been, her hands loose, the black folder still in one palm. She didn't react to Morrison's report, didn't look to defend herself or explain. Mitchell's eyes dropped to the backpack slung over her left shoulder. That's when everything changed. His gaze locked on a small patch near the seam, partially obscured by the fabric's fold. Its black background drank in the light while silver thread shimmered in contrast. A stylized trident, threaded with lightning. A skull centered beneath it. The partial words beneath were enough. He stopped walking. His expression, typically unreadable, cracked. A beat passed, then another. When he spoke, his voice was low, but it carried. Where did you get that patch? The woman finally looked directly at him. Her eyes met his with something too calm to be arrogance. She said one sentence. Same place you got yours. Mosul, 2019. The effect was immediate. Like a ripple through steel. Mitchell's shoulders stiffened. His hand unconsciously moved to his side, brushing the edge of scar tissue beneath his blouse. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. His silence dragged into something raw. He breathed the next word, ghost. That name cracked the tarmac wider than any boot. A crew chief lowered his wrench, motionless now. The mechanic who had been watching took 2 full steps back, face blanching. Someone's phone fell to the ground and skittered on the pavement. Morrison blinked hard, confusion starting to cloud the certainty in his voice. Mitchell moved closer, limping faster now, his posture halfway between protocol and reverence. He stopped just in front of her. She didn't flinch. Up close, the details became undeniable. The scarring on her knuckles, the perfect stillness of someone used to being hunted, the way she didn't shrink in the presence of a full bird kernel. "You were KIA," he said. "Langley gave you a star. I carried your memorial coin." Her answer came gently. Reports are wrong more often than they admit. Behind them, Morrison's face had drained of color. The name had reached his ears now, echoed in whispers. Ghost. The operator who walked through Iran. The rescue that never made it to open record. The shadow asset from a unit no one acknowledged on paper. He looked at his own hand, still tingling from where it had gripped her wrist. The memory felt heavier now. Sickening. His jaw tightened. Words tried to form but dissolved before breath could push them. The woman glanced at him then. Just one look. Nothing cruel, nothing scolding. Just enough to let the weight of reality settle on his shoulders. Enough to say, without words, that he'd made the kind of mistake that got people court-martialed. Or worse. Mitchell turned his body halfway, addressing the crowd without raising his voice. His tone had changed. It no longer belonged to a commander. It belonged to a witness. To someone who had once believed he was dead until she pulled him out of a firestorm with a shattered arm and half a clip of ammo. "This woman," he said, "saved my life in Mosul. She was supposed to be dead. They put her name on a wall and gave her a star." Nobody moved. Morrison took 1 step back, but it looked more like collapse than retreat. Around him, soldiers started to understand what they were seeing. The stranger in civvies, the patch that wasn't supposed to exist, the legend who stood alive, scarred, and absolutely still. The heat of the day hadn't fully arrived yet, but it was already suffocating, and not because of the sun. Colonel Mitchell's jaw clenched. His eyes didn't leave her face, but his voice shifted from shock to something closer to reverence. He asked her to confirm what he already knew, though part of him didn't seem ready to believe it. The words came slowly, like they'd been locked away for years. Chief Warrant Officer 5, Nadia Cross. Call sign, Ghost. The woman gave a slight nod. Not proud, not smug, just acknowledging what was no longer secret. Around them, the air shifted again. The rank hit like a hammer. CW5s were rare enough. Female operators in Tier 1 task forces. That was another level entirely. Most of the younger troops had never seen a CW5 up close, let alone one who disappeared from record 2 years prior. Mitchell turned slightly toward Morrison, his face flat and cold. "You put hands on a legend. Lieutenant, you questioned her clearance. You ignored protocol. You didn't even check credentials." Morrison didn't respond. His breathing had gone shallow. He looked like someone who'd just been pulled from wreckage and hadn't realized yet how badly he was bleeding. Mitchell stepped closer to Nadia, eyeing the faded patch on her backpack again. That trident. That skull. Task Force 141. Officially non-existent? Operationally unmatched. The kind of unit that handled missions with no names, in places with no maps, where no backup was coming. "I carried your memorial coin," Mitchell said quietly. "I gave a speech at Langley the day they etched your name into the wall. How are you standing here?" Nadia didn't answer immediately. She looked around first, noticing the phones, the curious faces, the wide eyes of junior soldiers who had never imagined a woman in civilian clothes could command a base's attention like this. Her voice was steady when it came. "Some of us come back quietly, not because we want to, because the job asks it." Williams stepped forward slowly, his cap low over his brow. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her with the kind of recognition that only comes when you've been in places where medals don't matter. Then he straightened his shoulders and gave her a slow, crisp nod. "Chief Cross, on behalf of the unit, I want to offer our apologies." She looked at him. Not kindly, not harshly, just steady. "I get it. You read what's in front of you, but it helps to look a little deeper before you reach conclusions." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. A few soldiers at the back shifted uncomfortably. The laughter and jokes from earlier had vanished, replaced by the weight of being witness to something rare. Not a scandal, not a punishment. A reminder that appearances lie. And sometimes, the smallest person in the crowd has lived a dozen lives more than you'll ever imagine. Morrison swallowed hard, his skin pale, lips pressed so tight they'd almost disappeared. The words he wanted to say died before reaching his throat. He tried anyway. "Chief, I didn't know." Nadia held up a hand. Calm. Controlled. "You did your job the way you thought you should. But your job isn't to dominate. It's to assess, to respond with intent. Remember that." The line landed like a stone dropped in water, no splash, just ripples that carried outward. A few of the female soldiers nodded. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to say that they'd been there, that they understood. Mitchell turned to the watching personnel. His voice rose just enough to carry. 15 years in special operations. 6 continents. More confirmed kills than most of you have weeks in country. Captured once. Escaped through the Pakistani border after 3 months in Iran. She's the reason I'm standing here today. Silence fell again. Not the kind forced by orders, the kind carved by awe. The crew chief who had been checking the rotor earlier stepped forward slightly, recognition blooming behind his eyes. "You flew out of Firebase Ember, didn't you?" Nadia gave the faintest smile. A trace of memory flickered behind her expression. Brief. Human. "You remember the rotor wash on that pole?" "Hell yeah. Burned half my face off. Worth it." That broke the tension. Just a little. A breath of normalcy. But it didn't last long. Morrison stood straighter now. Not out of pride. Out of necessity. He realized he'd come dangerously close to becoming the footnote in someone else's war story. The guy who mishandled Ghost. The man who nearly detained a myth. Chief Cross looked at him again. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. But directly. "Don't confuse the uniform with competence, Lieutenant, and don't mistake silence for absence." Mitchell nodded at her words like he'd heard them before. Maybe even said them once himself. The respect from the crowd shifted. Not performative, not starstruck. Something deeper. Rooted in the kind of credibility you don't earn with promotion boards or neat rows of ribbons. The kind that bleeds out of you after years of walking into places others fear to name. They all saw it now. This wasn't just some operator who slipped back onto base. This was a warrior who had already died once for her country and chose to come back, quietly, on her own terms. Nadia reached into her jacket pocket once more, but this time it was with a slow, deliberate ease that carried no tension. Her fingers pulled out a slim tablet, matte black with a reinforced casing. She tapped it once, then twice, and handed it straight to Morrison without a word. He took it, instinctively, still shaken, still unsure of what to expect. His hands were trembling slightly. The screen came to life with a secure document already open. At the top, Base Security Evaluation, FOB Falcon. Below that, the words, Phase 2, Gate Penetration Drill, Unmarked Operator. His name was listed 2 lines down, under Personnel Who Engaged Subject. He blinked. Then again, his lips parted, but nothing came out. The implications slammed into him harder than any reprimand could have. This hadn't been a random encounter. It had been a test, a classified one. She hadn't wandered onto the flight line by accident. She had been sent, and he'd failed. Sort of. The realization spread across his face in a slow, dawning wave of disbelief. The kind of moment where the room doesn't spin, but your stomach drops like a stone anyway. His voice, when it finally emerged, was thin. This was a drill. Nadia gave a single nod. Nothing smug, just confirmation. Her tone was dry, even, laced with the kind of quiet edge that didn't need raising. Every person I passed this morning waved me through. Some didn't even look up from their coffee. You were the only one who stopped me. He wanted to feel good about that. But the way she said it made clear that stopping her wasn't the whole point. It was how he had done it. The posture, the aggression, the complete absence of restraint. She didn't need to explain any of that. It was already written all over his face. His eyes dropped back to the tablet. There was a recording log, video feeds, audio transcripts. It had all been part of the assessment. Not just whether someone would stop her, but how. He could already imagine the debrief. He didn't know whether he'd be commended or torn apart. Probably both. William stepped up behind him and leaned just enough to read the screen over his shoulder. He let out a low breath, something between relief and guilt. Son of a... Morrison stiffened again, like he might brace for impact. Instead, Nadia slid the tablet back into her pocket, took out a small business card, and offered it to him. He accepted it without hesitation, like it might vanish if he didn't. The front was standard, white background, black lettering, Cross-Security Assessment Division, CW5. Below that, a number, a secure email. No insignia, no flourish. But the back held something else. Handwritten in clean, sharp strokes, it read, "Arrogance is weakness. Vigilance is strength. Never confuse the two." Morrison read it 3 times before lowering the card to his side. The words weren't just a reminder. They were a mirror. And what he saw reflecting back wasn't easy to face. He looked at her, and for the first time, truly saw the person behind the silence. Not just the patch or the rank or the past operations, but the presence, the clarity, the patience of someone who knew exactly what kind of lessons mattered most and how to deliver them with precision. "Thank you," he said, not much louder than a whisper. Nadia didn't reply. She didn't need to. She turned toward the helicopter again, boots crunching lightly against the grit-covered tarmac. The soldiers who had gathered stepped back instinctively, not in fear, in respect, like they finally understood who she was, or at least what she stood for. The mechanic from earlier gave her a nod, eyes lit with recognition. The same nod you give someone whose name you'll never say out loud but will remember for the rest of your life. Morrison remained still, the card in one hand, the lesson burning into the other. The evaluation had ended, but the consequences were only beginning. He'd passed something, maybe, but not with honors, not the way it mattered most. Williams clapped him lightly on the shoulder as they watched her approach the Black Hawk. "You'll remember this one, Lieutenant." Morrison didn't respond, and he just nodded. He knew he would. The Black Hawk's twin engines began to spool up at 0628, their pitch building steadily as the blades spun into a slow, chopping rhythm. Nadia walked toward the aircraft with the kind of composure that required no ceremony. One hand rested lightly on the strap of her backpack. The other hung relaxed by her side. She didn't rush, didn't nod, didn't look back. The crew chief stood at the rear ramp waiting for her. He didn't say a word. He just offered his hand. She took it briefly, stepped into the aircraft like it was the most natural place in the world, and disappeared into its dark interior. No salute, no fanfare, just the quiet return of someone who belonged more in the air than on the ground. Around the tarmac, the gathered soldiers began to disperse. Some still lingered, phones long-pocketed, expressions unreadable, but something had shifted. You could feel it in the silence. Not discomfort, reverence, like watching the ending of a chapter they never knew was being written. Mitchell didn't move until she was out of view. Then he turned slowly toward Morrison. His posture was firm, but unthreatening. His eyes held no anger, only weight. "You learned something today, Lieutenant." Morrison nodded, but it didn't feel sufficient. Mitchell paused before continuing. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the one talking. It's the one who says nothing, watches everything, and knows exactly when to move. He let the words settle before adding, "Strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to." Morrison looked down, still holding the card Nadia had given him. The handwriting on the back seemed clearer now, like it had been written just for him, not to punish, to remind. He looked back at the Blackhawk. It was lifting slowly now, blades at full roar, dust churning beneath its belly like a rising storm. Inside that cabin, somewhere behind armored skin and vibration-dampening panels, was a woman who had once been declared dead, and who had just taught him more about leadership than any field manual ever could. He felt small, not humiliated, just aware of how much he didn't know, of how far he had to go. It wasn't shame, it was clarity. William stepped up beside him and watched the Blackhawk disappear into the golden haze of morning. Hell of a thing. Huh. Morrison didn't speak. He just nodded again. Williams took a breath, hands on his hips, then glanced sideways. "Come on, sir. Let's get some of that motor pool coffee. You look like a man who needs a bad cup and a better story." Morrison hesitated for only a second before falling in step. His boots crunched on the tarmac with a little less stiffness now, a little less pride, a little more purpose. As they walked, he didn't say much. He just listened. Williams talked softly about other operators, about missions that didn't make the news, about people who disappeared from record and reappeared only when it mattered most. By the time they reached the concrete steps near the maintenance bay, the Blackhawk had become a dot in the morning sky. Just another aircraft. Just another mission. Except this one carried a ghost. And 1,000 stories no one would ever be cleared to hear. Morrison slipped the card into his chest pocket, just above the left breast. A quiet gesture, almost unconscious, but deliberate in its own way. He knew this wasn't the end of a mistake. It was the beginning of a different kind of education, one not built from lectures or briefings, but from silence, from watching, from getting it wrong and being willing to change. He didn't feel like an officer right now. He felt like a student. And maybe that was exactly what he needed. Morrison kept the card tucked in his wallet for the rest of that deployment. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a checkpoint, a reminder. Every time ego started to rise when his uniform made him walk a little taller than necessary. When he caught himself judging too fast, he'd take out the card, read the words again, and breathe a little slower. Arrogance is weakness. Vigilance is strength. Never confuse the two. It wasn't just about security anymore. It was about how you saw people, how you listened, how you led without needing to be loud. The card didn't feel like a warning. It felt like permission to become better. Not because someone yelled at him, but because someone outclassed him in silence. As weeks turned into months, his posture shifted. Less stiff, more grounded. He started asking more questions, interrupting less, noticing things others missed. Who carried tension in their jaw before patrol? Who didn't speak much after certain briefings? Who always volunteered? And who needed someone to pull them aside and ask why they hadn't? He stopped assuming what strength looked like. That lesson didn't come from a field manual or leadership seminar. It came from a woman in worn-out boots who stood her ground while he misjudged her in front of everyone, and never once raised her voice. By the end of his tour, he had earned more respect than he expected. But he knew now that rank and respect didn't always walk together. Sometimes, the most respected person in the room didn't wear a uniform at all. Sometimes, they moved through shadows, did the work, and never needed anyone to know. That morning on the tarmac stayed with him, not as a humiliation, but as a turning point, a hinge moment that cracked open the idea of who gets to lead and why. We're all taught to look up to medals, to uniforms, to ceremony, but not every hero comes wrapped in tradition. Sometimes, They slip by unnoticed. And if you're not paying attention, you miss them entirely. So here's the question. Would you recognize a warrior if they weren't wearing one? Would you know strength if it came with a quiet voice and a calm gaze instead of salutes and shouting? And when the moment came to choose between judgment and curiosity, what would you do? That's the kind of question that doesn't fade with time. It lingers, quiet, waiting, like a ghost.